But here we are on Tuesday, after a bank holiday, some people still talking about it and some people still annoyed about it. Republic say they weren't allowed to protest. Their voices were silent. Here's what they did on Saturday.
Not my king! 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 Not my king!
I'd say that looks like a protest to me. What do you think? 0344 499 1000. They had their protest, they just didn't have it in the Mall, which is seemingly the place where Graham Smith wanted to be. And there's a reason why they didn't do it there, because that is like literally the home straight, the final furlong of the procession as it goes back to Buckingham Palace. Why would you want them there? They could be in Pall Mall, they could be in Trafalgar Square, they could be in any number of places, Whitehall, just not the Mall. Seems perfectly reasonable to me. Let's talk to Ann Widdecombe and find out what she makes of it all. Ann, a very good morning to you.
Morning to you.
Now, this has caused quite a lot of dissent around these parts. Julie Hartley-Brewer being an absolutist about it, saying that, you know, they should have been allowed to protest wherever they wanted. I think the police got it right, and I think they've probably made a mistake by apologising and saying they got it wrong.
Yes, I agree entirely. I think the police did get it right. If one protester had glued himself in the path of the procession, if one protester had spooked a horse with a megaphone, that would have been then the springboard for everybody to say the police were incompetent, the police didn't do their job, the police should have seen it coming. We've been listening now for weeks to various people saying, you know, that they were going to disrupt the coronation and you know, protests, etc.
Yeah.
Now, there was a protest. You just showed the photos of the protesters. It's a nonsense to say that anti-monarchists weren't allowed to protest. But also, of course, Just Stop Oil were present, and they're not known for their restraint. And I think the police were right to be as forceful as they were.
Yeah.
And quite inevitably, they've arrested people that they then didn't have enough evidence to prosecute. OK, so you're sorry just to those people. But for the overall approach, there is no need for them to apologise at all.
No, I think an event like the Coronation, which, as we know, happens once every 70 years in this particular case, you don't risk it being ruined by a couple of extremist nutters who think that they want to make a point, when they were perfectly easily able to make that point half a mile away, which is exactly what they did. You know, there's nothing wrong with them. You know, I've got no problem with them protesting the monarchy. If they don't like the monarchy, that's absolutely their right to say so. But you don't do it right up front at the beginning of or at the end of the procession from Westminster Abbey to Buckingham Palace.
Well, I don't even think I would have minded that if it had been absolutely guaranteed that they would do nothing except stand there and chant.
Yeah.
But of course, we all know, you know, we've seen the extreme measures that had to be taken to safeguard the Grand National at Aintree. We've seen people not able to get to hospitals, not able to get to work because Just Stop Oil have been holding up pretty well whole cities and causing gridlock. And therefore we know, and the police know, that it is not just a question of waving a few placards. And they were absolutely right to try and distinguish between the two activities. Yeah. And you certainly couldn't risk it on the Mall. You couldn't risk spooking the horses. You couldn't risk people actually trying to get out into the procession and do themselves. You couldn't risk any of that. So it was right to confine it to Trafalgar Square.
Yeah.
But they weren't prevented from protesting. I'd be the first to be up in arms if they'd been prevented from protesting.
Right.
They were.
But that's the thing. It's completely wrong to say they were prevented from protesting. A small group of them who clearly wanted to gain access to the procession and to be right up close to it for whatever reason. They say they weren't going to disrupt it, but we've only got their word for that, you know. And as I said to Julia, you know, there are situations where you can, in fact, intervene before an event, such as when you stop and search people in the street because you suspect they might be up to no good, such as when you arrest a terrorist because you think they might be about to commit a terrorist act. So there is plenty of precedent for the police intervening before the event to make sure it goes smoothly.
Well, yes, and as I say, if just one incident had taken place, one horse had been spooked, if just one thing had happened, you know, the mountain of criticism that would have been heaped on the police, you know, they were damned if they didn't, damned if they didn't, quite honestly. That was the situation of the Met. I'm rather sorry that they've apologised. I think they did the right thing, and I wish they would do it more often.
Well, exactly right. I mean, I would rather take your view that, you know, this is the way to deal with Just Stop Oil, this is the way to deal with Extinction Rebellion. I'd like to see more robust policing of those kinds of protests. Also, you know, the idea that the police have apologised now leaves them open to being sued by these characters. And Graham Smith this morning said they were seeking legal advice as to whether they could take some public money off the police for wrongful imprisonment.
Yes, well, that's just one reason why the police should not have apologised. The police should have said robustly, we were doing our job, we were taking every last precaution. You know, it is often the case that when somebody is arrested, they are subsequently released without charge. That is not an unusual situation in British justice. Doesn't mean that they were arrested on frivolous or malicious grounds. Just means there was insufficient evidence to charge them at the end.
Yeah.
Now, you know, we just all need to keep a sense of proportion and some common sense there. They are clearly demonstrating. They were not stopped from demonstrating.
No. Well, you can see it even as we speak. There's loads of them, hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them in Trafalgar Square and walking up and down Whitehall. You know, you would think to some extent, if they were as noisy as that by the actual procession itself, you know, that would have been an embarrassing situation for the country, wouldn't it?
Well, it would have been embarrassing for the country, but I'm all for free speech. But I think it would also have led to breaches of the peace.
Well, that's the other aspect of it that I mentioned to Julia.
Breaches of the peace.
Yeah.
If they'd done that in the Mall with a whole load of, you know, cheering supporters around, then I think, you know, there might have been some outbreaks of violence. So I think, I can only say again, I think the police were absolutely right. I wish they hadn't apologised. Above all, I wish that this sets a precedent for the line that they'll take in future, and that they'll intervene as much as they can before something happens, right, rather than trying to cope with it afterwards.
But that's the other problem with the apology, is that because of that now, everybody they try to arrest in an upcoming protest will say, are you going to let me go tomorrow, and then apologise to me?
And they would also say, and then I'll sue you afterwards,
yeah,
so carry on, officer.
Yeah. So they've totally undermined their own authority.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know why they've done it, but then I don't know why the police do an awful lot of things they do.
I mean, more importantly, I suppose, and I guess it's not necessarily right to blame the police here, but 150 teenagers have been violently killed in London since Sadiq Khan was elected mayor. You know, that is a shameful statistic and a terrible statistic and an awful statistic. What can we do about that?
Well, why do people carry knives? Why are people prepared to use knives? The answer is they don't think they'll be caught. They don't think there'll be consequences. The only thing that stops violence is if the person about to perpetrate it, A, believes they'll be caught, and B, believes that there will be unpleasant consequences as a result of being caught. Now, they don't believe that. You know, every time the police try to stop and search, which is one way of preventing people from carrying knives, there's an immediate protest. You know, it's an infringement of liberty. They're doing it more to the blacks than to the whites. They're doing this, they're doing that. And that is the sort of protest that we get every single time. And yet it is crucial that preventative action is taken. That's what we saw at the Coronation, preventative action. That's what we need in controlling gangs and in controlling knife carrying and in controlling the violence which has now broken out, particularly amongst teenagers. Don't do that. You won't deter it.
No.
Once again, they're dealing with things after the event. There needs to be a huge deterrent factor. If you believed that if you left home with a knife in your pocket, you were going to be stopped before you got to the end of the road, you were going to be searched, and that not only was the knife going to be confiscated, but that you were going to be arrested, then that would really rather spoil your evening, so you probably wouldn't do it.
No, exactly right. I mean, Scotland Yard is currently investigating several incidents over the weekend, including 4 people who were shot in 3 separate incidents in London. In all 3 shootings, the victims had been sitting in a car when a gunman approached and opened fire. I mean, it sounds like something out of Chicago.
It does, and we're rapidly getting that way. We'll never be as bad as Chicago because there's no right to bear arms in this country. But the problem is there isn't a policing of those who do. Probably, I don't know, but probably most of these guns are unlawfully obtained. They are almost certainly illegally imported. That is what you generally find, particularly amongst gang crime and drug crime, which is a big source of violence. That you can't blame the police for that. There has to be some control also of how guns get in to the hands of those who are prepared to use.
Yeah. Absolutely right, and there must be some way of tracking all these guns, how they're getting into the country, where they're being bought and sold, and where the marketplace is for them as well. Stay with us, Anne, if you would. We've got a few more things to talk to you about. Ann Widdecombe is here, former Government Minister, of course, and MEP.